I'd like to make an announcement on the retake exam of Monday, if I'm not mistaken. So I leave the floor to him. Prego, Felice.
Thank you, Professor Salvi. I, the students, I want to know that all the details for the retake are on the module page of pre-course advanced corporate finance, and I have seen that 15 of you are registered. Remember that it is mandatory that you register for the exam that will be held next Monday at 9 o'clock in the morning in oral form. Thank you very much.
Oral form.
And the deadline for the registration is the 13 at 6 p.m. Thank you.
It's important that you register for the exam, okay? You look upset because of the oral version. Why?
Honestly, I think it's just not fair for us to do it oral while the others do it written in a written form.
It's better oral.
No,
I don't think so.
era concetto, era più facile.
Well, it's gonna be okay.
Yeah, I know, but
Don't use the word fair. Che parolone. Anche se nessuno vuole rompere le scatole. Lei, se avesse una pistola adesso la punterebbe contro. Si vede dallo sguardo. Good morning, madam.
good morning. Sorry, I'm late.
You're okay. So today, my dear friends, we have this strange calendar that requires 1 hour for this session, and then we're gonna move for a lunch break, and then from 2 maximum to 6. Okay, we know how it works now. Tomorrow is gonna be the same. Tomorrow is gonna be the same. So thank you for coming and for having exploited the fact that you're coming in only for 1 hour in the morning. I destroyed the morning. I'm sorry for that. But I needed to come from Milan, and I had to bring my small child to the asilo, come si dice asilo? To
Kindergarten.
Yeah, so I'm sorry for that. So, do you have questions concerning what we have seen so far? Yes.
I do. I want to ask, like yesterday, we have for enterprise value,
Yes.
we have free cash flow, and there's this too
This is a division.
division.
Okay.
So that means the summa, right?
Oh, let me go straight to the point.
Okay.
You're referring to this one, for example, right? Ah, sorry.
Bisogna switchare.
Ok. Quindi lo facciamo spiegare. Guarda, la divisione. Tac. Videocamera. Non quella là, però. No,
Ma non bisogna spiegare.
è strano.
Direttamente di là.
Ah, ok. Ok.
完了，改时间了课程了。明天连是不是到6点的，到7点的。
没有吧？
是，因为我
Tac.
预约
Tac.
我预约的明天的1小时看的时间。
Bisogna attivare il video. Sopra.
可以改吗？
现在改来不及了。
怎么办呀？
Ah, sì, ok. Okay. So it means that so far nobody looked at us from home. Nobody complained. It's a mystery. It's not fair. There's only the fact of being fair is only on one side. This is a little bit asymmetrical. It's not fair that you connect just for connecting while doing other things. Don't connect. It's a matter of respect, not a matter of being fair. It's a matter of respecting people. In this case, myself. Fair is symmetrical. I appreciate a lot the fact that we're here. I can understand that you are at home. I can. Making an effort. I don't understand. I pretend I understand. Okay, let's put it this way. But if you are there, you should be there. Otherwise, do something better. I mean, I hope you have something better to do than follow these boring lectures. If you have been 10, 20 minutes, well, actually, what is it? 10 minutes connected and you haven't seen anything and you have noticed that you didn't, it means that it's okay. What was the question, sorry?
I want to ask the free cash flow. I want to just know that is it like two part or just a division?
It's a division, no,
Okay.
absolutely. It's a division, yes.
Yeah, only.
Free cash flow divided by RA.
Okay.
Absolutely. Other questions? We should take note of those who are here at that moment. We have to.
Sorry, I want to understand what's the break, I don't know, what reversal?
That means the sum of the two things. The sum. Yeah. The two things considered together. Working capital and fixed assets will generate free cash flows that in turn must be discounted, divided by RA, in order to get the enterprise value. That's the idea.
I have another one last question. Is there is a space in the first slide? I think it's
In the first slide.
first slide of this one.
It's this one.
Oh, okay. It's next. That next.
Next one.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, probably you're right. It's not the first one. No, it's the first one. This is
Maybe
the cover. I'm going back.
second of this kind of slide of the picture.
Do you mind if you remove your mask because I cannot understand?
Okay. So the second slide like this, I think probably there is a space between equity and
It means this one.
yes, and there's a explanation conservation of value principle. There's repackaging of risk and therefore return. There's a slight space here in net debt and equity. And
You
this
mean the
is,
arrow that goes in the middle?
yeah. I a little bit confused. Is that means tax after the explanation you want to fit in there, or what is this space?
No, it's deliberately done.
Yeah, I
No,
didn't.
it's not a mistake.
Yeah, I know. So I didn't really understand what this explanation for this space.
But we could even get rid of it if it deserves it. It doesn't add anything, this arrow here. If you want.
Okay. So there's no space. Okay.
If this avoids confusion, get rid of it.
Okay.
We're okay.
Yeah.
Other questions, my dear friends? So, if you don't have additional questions, let me remind you what we have to do. What do we have in the menu before going for lunch? We have in the menu today and tomorrow basically one thing. Yeah. Which is concluding this set of slides, okay, introducing and discussing the second set of slides, and third, but it is connected to the two sets of slides, prepare and discuss the Diageo case, which is a case on the capital structure decision. Next Wednesday, we're going to move to another related topic, needless to say, that is the hybrid financial instruments. More specifically, we're going to introduce the convertible bonds. And to this regard, we're also going to examine the Promodes case. Okay, if, as I hope, we're going to conclude the three topics related to capital structure before tomorrow afternoon or before the second session tomorrow afternoon, we're going to anticipate the convertible bonds to tomorrow afternoon. Okay? I hope you remember, it's not that far, it was yesterday. I hope you remember that the idea was that we have shared together yesterday was the following. We have started the analysis from 1958, in other words, from the basic Modigliani Miller propositions, proposition number 1 and proposition number 2. And then we, once having presented the content of these 2 propositions, I've then told you that we are now going to relax some of the assumptions that lie behind the proposition 1 and 2 of Modigliani and Miller. And we have started by abandoning the assumption of absence of taxes. Those taxes actually do exist, and we needed to examine what could have happened by introducing the taxes in the Modigliani-Miller world. Okay, let me rapidly remind you what we mean with proposition 1 and proposition 2 of the original Modigliani-Miller theorem or framework. Modigliani-Miller said, proposition 1 says that the value of the firm is actually written here, that the value of the firm is independent from the way that firm it is financed. Okay? In other words, the value of the firm is not explained, I could say, in dozens of alternative ways. Let me try another one. In other words, the value of the firm is not given on the right side of the balance sheet, where you find liabilities and equity. It's mainly driven by the asset side of the balance sheet, as the left part of this picture tells you. That the value of the firm is given by the quality of your working capital and the quality of your fixed assets, in other words. The fact that you have on the other side net debt and equity simply means how you allocate the value created in the asset side on the shoulders of creditors and shareholders. Okay, and that is proposition 1. Why is this proposition so disruptive in the finance world? It has been. Because it tells us a rather strong principle, I would say, rather, it has a major consequence. It focuses, it says, dear managers, don't try and struggle to finance your company in sophisticated ways, structured finance and whatever, because you cannot change that much the value of your firm. What really counts at the end of the day, if some assumptions hold, is that you are very good in what you do on a daily basis, operationally. And that seems to be a rather trivial message, but actually it's the opposite, because there are a lot of companies out there, I told you that yesterday, that they try to self-convince themselves that by financing the company in an appropriate way, they could improve the happiness of the shareholders, which according to Modigliani Miller, if some assumptions hold, for example, the absence of taxation, which is a strong assumption, I know, is simply false, is simply wrong, if you want. Okay? Proposition number 2 comes from proposition 1, needless to say, it's a di cui, we would say in Italian, it's a corollary, it's a consequence. Proposition number 2 says that if you want to estimate the expected return for shareholders from their investment, you can apply a simple equation that says that the happiness of shareholder, RE, happiness of shareholders, RE, is the sum of 2 things. Is the sum of a first very important and normally pivotal driver, represented by the overall return of the firm on the assets that it owns, RA, plus a so-called leverage effect, that in turn is the result of a product between RA and RT in the parentheses, I hope you remember, multiplied by the debt-equity ratio. This leverage effect, the second component of the return for equity holders, says that you can also, I won't say, let's say, increase the happiness and the appetite and the satisfaction for shareholders by leveraging more the firm if, it's a big if the parenthesis is positive. What you've seen in the parenthesis is positive. Okay? But if we could then go back to Modigliani and Miller proposition 1, they would say the fact that you are, since we said that you cannot change the happiness of creditors and shareholders by reshuffling the capital structure, it seems a little bit contradictory what I'm saying with proposition 2. Because with proposition 2 I'm saying that you can increase the happiness if you leverage more. But actually what Modigliani and Miller would say is that it is only, how can I say, fictitious, the fact that you're earning more. Actually you're earning more, but you're earning more because the company is becoming riskier. It's the fair remuneration for the additional risk that you are bearing on your shoulders in case you decide to go for additional leverage. Okay? That's the idea. Francesca, capito?
Sì, sì. No, dicevo che se la ricorderà per sempre questa.
No,
Questa è
Scherzando. Guarda, I have a lot of defects, a lot, you can see them, even physical, but non sono rancoroso, non ho tempo per il rancore. Per rancore di che? Ha espresso un'opinione, non è che, così come l'ho espresso l'amici, mancherebbe. Well, ragazzi, feel free to say whatever you want, No, really, I'm not kidding. And feel free to hear whatever I want to say. Se no non funziona, no? Okay, so that was basically the idea. It's a very, very powerful idea. I don't know, just to give you an idea of how important these Modigliani-Miller propositions they are, in our field of research, management, let's say, broadly speaking, management, this is the consequences of Modigliani-Miller. Modigliani-Miller and the consequences of Modigliani-Miller, it's the second most intensively studied topic in business management. Just to tell you. Over the last 60 years, whatever it is, there's been the second most intensively studied topic. The first one, it has been another finance topic, which is the efficient markets, but that's something that goes beyond our. So imagine how important it is. However, what's your name?
Me?
Sì.
Angela.
Angela. Well, follow just a bit. Angela would now say, yes, Professor, but then you said that these are conditions that in some, the propositions rely on some assumptions that in some cases do not hold. What happens to the propositions if we relax some of the assumptions? Thank you, Angela. This is a very good question that actually we have started examining yesterday. In fact, we have started by relaxing a rather important assumption behind the 1958 version of Modigliani-Miller, which is the absence of taxation. Because critics of Modigliani-Miller, they started saying, bravi loro, it's easy to reach these conclusions if we ignore taxation. No? Correct. It's correct. Their objection is correct. But as I told you yesterday, they couldn't be able to improve what Modigliani-Miller originally said. So they decided to say to the rest of the humanity on this planet, say, sit back and relax, okay? We're going to remove by ourselves some of the assumptions. And they started with corporate taxation, including the top corporate taxation into their framework. And the conclusion, let's go step by step. That's how I'm going directly to the conclusion. If we include the corporate taxation in the analysis, the right side of this picture would include 3 slices, not only 2. Why? Because there is a third claimant, the tax authority, saying, that is entitled to receive a portion of the value of the firm, a portion of the cash flows. Okay? And this is really disturbing, I understand that. It has even priority over the other 2. You know that, right? It is a prioritized claim. And this is disturbing for the shareholders and the creditors as well, Because needless to say, if the size of the pizza, left side, remains unchanged, and now you have to cut it into 3 slices, somebody's going to pay the price of leaving the table with some appetite. Because you cannot be entirely satisfied since there is somebody there with arrogance has sat on the table before the other two, eat his or her own slice, and leave the table to first creditors and then shareholders. Okay, shareholders, they try to, as you may intuitively understand, to reduce as much as possible, no? This slice, which is disturbing, let's call it this way, disturbing. Okay, one way for reducing the slice dedicated to the tax authority is to leverage the firm, to raise additional debt. Why? Because when you borrow more from banks, bondholders, whoever you may think of, you pay an interest rate. So you negotiate an interest rate, you pay interest expenses, okay, and those interest expenses are normally tax deductible, which means that you reduce the slice of the tax authority. Okay? You can measure this advantage of reducing the taxes. Okay? You can measure this advantage with 2 alternative techniques. The first one is to compute, and here, to compute a weighted average cost of capital that takes into account, red parentheses, takes into account the fact that the actual cost of debt is going to be net. 1 minus TC means net of the corporate taxes. Okay, so you have a tax shield of debt measured by the parentheses. Or, alternatively, you can measure it out analytically, how can I say? Yeah, analytically probably is the best way. You estimate the tax shield that you expect to get the next few years from the fact that interest expenses are tax deductible. You discount these future tax savings appropriately with an appropriate discount rate, and you sum all these future discounted tax savings in order to get the value of the overall package of the slices that you're gonna subtract from the tax authority. In some cases, if some assumptions hold, you can even simplify that formula in the second version, but the 3 assumptions that you see mentioned here should be satisfied. Okay? In any case, what happens in terms of the, where is it? I lost it, sorry. Okay. In any case, what happens if you introduce the corporate taxes and you don't relax other assumptions on which Modigliani Miller has been grounded, you observe that the after-tax weighted average cost of capital is steadily declining. So the format of this function is still a line, but now not an horizontal line, but a declining line. Okay, the blue, actually I think the light blue that you see on there. If that's the case, pay attention, because this is the link from what we said yesterday and actually what we are continuing to examine today. If that's the case, in other words, if you observe that the cost of capital decreases progressively and in line with the debt-equity ratio that you have on the horizontal axis, you would be tempted to say correctly that companies should leverage themselves as much as they can in order to minimize as much as they can the cost of capital, which is the discount rate we were referring before. Okay, so if you minimize the denominator given a certain number in the numerator, you maximize the enterprise value. It's arithmetic, right? So if your objective is to maximize the enterprise value and you have a certain stream of free cash flows, one way to reach this objective is to minimize the denominator, which means positioning yourself on the right side of this graph. Okay? But, and this is the huge but or however, you don't observe a lot of companies out there which are highly leveraged. So there is a conflicting evidence on the fact that the prescriptions of Modigliani Miller, 1963, with corporate taxes, are not actually being followed by the by companies in reality. Okay, how is it possible that we don't find this consistency between theory and practice? Various suggestions have been formulated over the years. The first ones that we have seen yesterday is because not necessarily companies may have such a huge tax advantage to be developed. I'm referring to this one, to this line, okay, that we saw yesterday. Alternative, suggestion number one. But actually what is more important is that if you leverage a lot your company, you may face rather important costs of financial distress. This slide has a title, and the title is Costs of Financial Distress. But actually you can see that then there are two types of costs of financial distress: bankruptcy costs and agency costs. Yesterday we ended our meeting by introducing the direct and indirect bankruptcy costs. Okay, what we're going to do now, from now on, is to move to the agency costs and the other costs that could somehow limit the amount of money that companies are willing to take on in their capital structure. Let me rapidly remind you also what we're talking about when we refer to bankruptcy costs. Bankruptcy costs could be of two types. The direct costs are those costs that are actually being paid by the company in case the company goes into a bankruptcy procedure. Okay, and they can be estimated somehow. We dealt with that yesterday. But much more intriguing from a conceptual standpoint are the indirect costs, which are those costs that can occur, or frequently occur, before the company gets into bankruptcy. And in some cases, it is not even necessary that the company enters into a bankruptcy procedure, could even avoid it. But it is important that in order to generate these indirect costs, that the company is perceived to be excessively indebted or leveraged, if you prefer, by the stakeholders. Perceived as being, you smell, this company is risky, is excessively leveraged. What happens when you, as a stakeholder, feel in the air this smell? You stay away from the company. Stay away means you lose sales, you lose employees, you lose suppliers, you lose market power with your clients, you suffer a lot of negative consequences that in turn will reduce the enterprise value of the firm. Okay? And generally the magnitude of these indirect costs is much larger than the direct costs. Okay? Some companies suffer more than others of the indirect costs, which are those companies that cannot provide adequate guarantees to the creditors. We saw yesterday the example, real estate company versus pharmaceutical. You remember? Okay. That was the idea. That's it. Okay. Remember that. Remember, where is the graph? I want to show you the graph. I'm losing the graphs today. Where is the graph? Let me see if I can see it. Oh, we're gonna see it later. Okay. Okay, we have it. What do we? If we go back to financial distress costs, means the main slide that I projected before. We have exhausted the topic of direct and indirect bankruptcy costs. But still, there is a line that says agency costs, which is a rather intriguing one, because it brings us to the worst animals that we all have in our DNA as entrepreneurs, and let me say, as individuals as well. Agency costs, I'm sure you've heard about this in other courses, economics, for example. Economics, I would say. Agency costs in this course, they do refer to the conflicts of interest that could arise between various categories of stakeholders within a firm. Mainly between shareholders and managers, but in this case I would say it's even more important in this room now, the conflict of interest between shareholders and creditors. Okay, what do I mean with conflict of interest? Probably it is, it's going to be much easier if we take a look at some examples. Let me see. Well, let me speak, otherwise you get this right. Imagine what happens when a company is perceived as excessively leveraged. What are the consequences that you would expect, the behavior that you would expect from the owners of the firm in order to favor themselves against creditors? The company is extremely leveraged, is in a risky position. You, like a Schettino guy, as we said, mentioned yesterday, you tend to protect yourself, right? Who cares about the creditors, right? You start taking some actions that protect your category as a shareholder and as owner of the firm, normally being detrimental of the interests of the other category of claimants, which are creditors. And what are the things that you can do in order to favor yourself and be negative for the others? For example, you could, if you have some cash in the company, and you may have it, or surplus assets, you may be tempted to do what? To distribute the dividends. Right? You cash in what's left in the company so that it goes into your pocket as a shareholder, and who cares about the creditors, right? First thing that you could do, the first one that comes to my mind is this one. The second, which refers to, by the way, milking the property. It's milking the property. The second thing, which refers to the second point that you see here, is the temptation of saying, you know what, we're sinking. Probably we're sinking. There are some investments that we could do, which are ordinary investments, normal investments, that even if they have a positive NPV, and so we should do them, it's not necessary to do them. Why? Because in case we do them, they are not sufficiently high NPV projects in order to satisfy the expectations of creditors and leave something in our pocket. A spesa non vale l'impresa, we would say. Yeah, they are good, but they're not that good. And since the first priority we should have is to repay the debt, if we know that we do these average projects and what we get is just goes into the pockets of creditors, you know what? Let's even think if we should do that. So that it comes the third and the most important consequence, the first one mentioned here, excessive risk-taking, asset substitution problem. The temptation in this case would be the following. Let's accept, if any, all the projects that are very promising. The idea is very simple. I know it's a little bit cynical, but this is the way it goes. Frequently, not always, but frequently. Suppose that you are very leveraged. You are in a risky position, okay, as an entrepreneur. And you have on your table, ideally, 10 possible new normal projects, and one, on top of that, one project which is totally peculiar, absolutely different from the others, that has basically two possible outputs: a huge success or a dramatic failure. Huge success or a dramatic failure. Now, if that's the story, a lot of people out there would be tempted to go for the single project rather than single extremely risky project, rather than the 10 normal average project. Why? Because you have nothing to lose. You're already sinking. It's like betting on a coin. If it is head or toss, I mean, you win. If you lose, you are already losing. Who cares, right? I know that you are good, evil, good souls, and you say, "No, I will never do that." But this is exactly what normally happens. Exactly what. I could quote you various cases in which I worked in which the entrepreneurs behave this way. It's a very risky behavior, because if you do that deliberately, knowing that you are sinking, you could be prosecuted criminally for bancarotta fraudolenta. Okay? But, there's always a gray line between behaving criminally or not. So, in some cases, even in bona fide, in good faith, you do some things because you lose your normal temper. You start doing crazy things because I can understand some people that they do because they would really have lost the normal management of the firm. Question?
Didn't we saw that in direct cost they were not allowed to access the more profitable projects?
Didn't we see, sorry?
In the direct cost, bankruptcy. Yeah, we saw no more access to financing even for profitable projects. So it's a step.
No, absolutely, yeah, sure. No, you shouldn't be that categorical, no? There is the possibility that in case you are perceived as extremely risky, banks start being concerned, say, let's see if they ask additional money, if we should give the money to these guys, okay? Having said that, which is normal, it is also true that in some cases companies do have some cash on hand that could use so the two things are not necessarily conflicting. And there's always a gray line where you still may have some residual borrowing capacity. You may have, as it happened in Banca Popolare di Bari, you may have some good relationship with the owner, say the chairman and the general manager of the bank. So you say, we see vediamo. So the story, no? But you may have also some cash. You could sell some of the assets. You could sell some, and this is something on which I'm going to elaborate. By the way, thank you for the question. Selling some of the assets, because it's not mentioned here. Actually, I forgot to write it, but there should be a fourth element, and you can write it down, which is selling the crown jewels. Selling the crown jewels. Selling the crown jewels means that, again, let me put it this way: it's a risky and criminal thing to do if you know that you're doing deliberately for damaging creditors. Okay, this is an important premise. However, if you do it, the temptation of, if you are in this case, this situation, one of the temptations you may have, cara Angela, is to sell the most valuable things that you have and leave to the creditors an empty box. Again, I'm not encouraging you to do that because this is criminal behavior in some cases. But this is something that you observe on a regular basis made by companies, okay? Somehow a little bit embellished by some ribbons on it, alcuni infiocchettato, but the substance is that is called actually we can do it. selling crown jewels, but this goes into, okay? Real-time correction of sites. More updated than this, the current. But let me also, and then we change the slide. Let me go again on the first, which is more intriguing to me, the fact that you may be tempted to accept those projects which you have never considered so far because they are excessively risky. But now, since you're thinking, you said you could be tempted to say, you know what, let's open it forward with that bet that we didn't want to do in the past. It could be the right time to do this bet today. Let me quote you an extreme example, hoping that this one remains in your brain more than other examples. Some years ago, many years ago, again, unfortunately I don't have the article from the journal, I cannot find it anymore. On Il Corriere della Sera, the local pages, what they call Grande Milano, it means the Provincia di Milano. There was an article, you know those small articles that you see there, sort of a gossip on Grande Milano that attracted my attention, that basically said what follows. That there was a company in Brianza. Brianza means in the northeast of Milan, where there is a strong district of furniture and design. Okay? And one of these companies producing furniture was actually being sued by the employees. Not the company, the owner was being sued by the employees because this entrepreneur was going bankrupt, and rather than paying the payrolls of the employees, he decided to use the residual cash that he had on hand to buy lottery tickets. He didn't win because the company went bankrupt, but this is probably the best example that I can provide. It's true, huh? The best example that I can provide of a rather risky investment where either it is a huge success or a dramatic failure, right? It was a dramatic failure in that case. And the employees were rather disappointed by the behavior of the owner of the firm, because they expected that even if the cash was not sufficient to go ahead with the normal daily operations, he would have used that cash to pay the salary to these guys. This is criminal behavior. It's not a joke. So say, però non è male sta cosa. Actually, I know I'm saying something that is a little bit disturbing, so please forgive me for that. But from a purely financial, cynical standpoint, it's perfect. I mean, it's perfect. I mean, you're sinking, you have nothing to lose, you're already sinking. You say, we have 2,000 euros cash in the bank, let's use the 2,000 euros bank for buying lottery tickets in this case. O la spacca, we would say, right? La spacca in quel caso. And the thing, but again, this is one of the areas in which there are conflicting interests between what finance people would suggest and what the criminal law would prevent from doing. Okay? However, these are examples of agency costs. When a company is extremely leveraged, shareholders may variously act in order to damage creditors. How can creditors protect themselves? Because they are not stupid. No, bankers are not stupid. Let's examine this slide and then we're going to go for lunch. There are at least 5 or 6 things that they can do in order to protect themselves. They are not listed in terms of importance. It's a generic list. Okay, my personal ranking of these 6 factors would probably start with the raise, guaranteed debt, and leasing. This one, the 5th one. Probably, it's if you talk to a banker, he or she will tell you that this is the first tool that they use to protect themselves, to have some specific assets provided as a collateral, as a guarantee for their exposure, so that they know that in case the owner behaves improperly, they have one building, they have one factory, whatever that is reserved for them. And this is quite obvious. So raise guaranteed debt or leasing means that you can take the money, the asset back whenever you want if they don't pay. And actually the most important thing is that the property of the asset is still of the leasing firm. It's not of the company that leases the asset. When you go for a leasing, it's a sort of a rental. You're renting something, okay? So the owner is still the leasing company, and it's a way of protecting the company. It's my personal ranking. The second important thing that is finding growing momentum is introduce contractual provisions. I have it in the car. You can hear it, but there is a report that was prepared on Banca Popolare, the famous bankruptcy of Banca Popolare di Bari, a rather important one, as you probably know. And reading the internal procedures of Banca Popolare di Bari, they mention also covenants, the fact of protecting the bank from creditors by introducing covenants. Covenants means clausole contrattuali, contractual provisions that mainly aim at disciplining the behavior of managers / shareholders during the life of the debt. Literally disciplining in terms of what they can do and what they cannot do. Yesterday I mentioned some examples. Let me give you additional ones. For example, you, my dear company, cannot distribute dividends without my permission. Okay? And it's quite easy to understand the reason for this limitation, because if you distribute dividends and cash, this cash goes into your pockets, you're leaving the company poor in a poor state, and this could be detrimental for the payment of debt. Or on the other side, you which is quite popular as well, you tend to discipline some financial ratios over the years, okay, that cannot exceed a certain negotiating level. If it goes beyond, there's a yellow card. Rarely a direct red card. Normally there's a yellow card. And then if you continue breaching this quota, there's the red card. Okay? But there are also other possibilities. For example, this is very snobbish. The second one, try to match cash inflows with cash outflows. This is quite intuitive as well. You as a banker, you should try to match as much as possible, the cash generating ability of the firm with the cash needed to service the debt. Let me put it this way. An extreme example again. Suppose that you are a company that produces it. It's a mine company that explores for gold. You're digging for gold. Okay? It takes time to find the gold, right? You need to start digging, make a lot of investments, and sooner or later you hope to find gold, right? Takes 2 years, 3 years, 1 year, whatever it is, okay? Do you think that it makes any sense if a bank provides the support to this company with a maturity of 6 months? No, because there is a cash mismatch between the cash outflow, the repayment of debt in 6 months, and your ability to generate cash to repay the debt that's going to come in 2 years. Probably in that case, it would be better to have a longer term maturity debt that matches with the time you expect to start extracting gold from the gold mine. Huh? You wouldn't say, I cannot repay them to you in 6 months because I will still be digging. Right? These are all, I don't know what your impression is, but these are very good old common sense comments. You don't need to be a finance wizard to understand these things. And last saggezza di tutti noi, no? And that's exactly the way it works. Exactly. This is, you don't just stop thinking that finance is something complex. It's something that helps you keep your feet on the ground. Finance is driven by street markets. It's not driven by sophisticated markets. The principles are the same. A little bit more snobbishly presented, but the story, if you go back to the basics, is always the same. Or you could increase the degree of concentration of debt. That's another thing that has been developed over the most recent years. Banks that historically, our companies during the 80s, the 90s, they used to have a lot of bank accounts with different banks. Banca Intesa, Cassa di Risparmio di Cuneo, a company from here, Carige, Unicredit, Montepaschi. And this, of course, for creditors is a problem. First, because you work less, because the client is spread over a certain number of banks. And secondly, because you cannot monitor appropriately the overall exposure of the client, which is dispersed over a certain number of banks. So another technique, which is strongly pushed by banks in order to protect themselves, is to increase the degree of concentration of them. Plus another, actually, these are the things that the only one that I am commenting is the placement techniques. It means that it's less relevant, okay? These are some ways or tools for the creditors have in order to protect themselves in their relationship with their clients. Okay? Now, let's have a lunch break. I'll see you back at 2 p.m. We're going ahead with the rest of the presentation.